Thank you guys so much for tuning in to Shield Apologetics, sharing his identity, evidentially leading doubters. I am Pastor Jared France, apologetics pastor at Liberty Church. We have such an exciting podcast for you guys today. I have my very good friend who honestly I just met in person just a little bit ago, my very good friend, the Faithiest Atheist, with us today. So we're going to go through an amazing talk together. And honestly, we're going to take this first talk because I'm going to have him on, if he's willing to come on more times. And we're going to talk deeper into some theological stuff, into some apologetic stuff. But today, we're going to take this time to really focus on this episode, is to show people how important it is to have friends who disagree with you, but how important it is that you can have a really good friendship with people who disagree with you. And I thought of no one better than my friend who all the time, I love his sarcasm. Him and I seem like we have the same sarcasm with situations, and we joke a lot. But one of the biggest things is that I got connected with my friend over the Faithiest Atheist, going through and seeing him, going on podcasts, and also going to different apologetics conferences, and that intrigued me. So we both agreed to be able to set a date and come on here together. So my friend, it's so good to have you with us today. So I'll just have you introduce yourself, and we'll take it one question at a time, brother.
Hey, Pastor, thanks for having me. Yes, I am the Faithiest Atheist. If you look on Facebook and type that in, you'll see my page. And then I have something on YouTube, but it's pretty pathetic. So actually, Facebook is my main place. And Twitter, I don't really like going to Twitter. I have something on Twitter, but I don't really like going there so much. So pretty much just Facebook, Faithiest Atheist is where people can find me. And I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. I mean, I was telling a lot of people that I work with, and telling some people at our church, I said, you guys will have to for sure tune in into this podcast, because not many people, and it's interesting to me. I mean, we're seeing it more and more now today, that more Christian apologetics, and also even from atheist YouTube channels and podcasts, they're bringing Christians on there more too, which is fantastic. So what I want to do today, as we'll dive into that a little deeper here in a minute. But what I want to do today is to get to know you more. And, when we first met, I had just a lot of questions, because, I have a really good friend who is really mirror of your character. And it was the one I was speaking with off camera, and you and him are so similar. So it's the same type of questions I asked him when we first became friends that, we'll go through together today. So what is your story to atheism? What led you to atheism?
Okay, yeah, I'll give you a quick version of my story. I do want to point out that I'm at home, and my wife, 2 teenage daughters, and my dog at any point could jump in, and you might hear that in the background, but that's just the joys of home.
Dude, don't worry, because right before this, my wife, she's a professional piano teacher. Right. Right back here, this closet right here is all her piano stuff. So she says, "What time's your podcast?" I said, "Well, it's at 5." And she says, "I have a lesson at 5:30. I have to come get some books." She's like, "So if I pop in there, we'll be fine." I was like, "Yeah, it'll be fine. Don't worry." Yeah. So if you see curtains move without seeing a person, there's someone there. So okay. Don't worry. So
okay, awesome. Okay, so yeah, I grew up in Georgia in a Southern Baptist community, heavily raised by my church. I began to suspect in my teenage years that when it came to questions and answers, that people just kind of came up with their own answers. But because I noticed if someone's answers didn't match with another Christian's, and at this point I'm like 16, 17, asking questions. And if, say, my youth pastor's answers didn't match with my pastor's, neither one of them would really budge. They would just kind of let it go. So, and not only that, back in the 1970s and 1980s, at least in this small community, the theme was more like John MacArthur. If you're familiar with John MacArthur, it was more like, don't wait for a special, feeling, and don't wait for something, amazing. Just submit. God is sovereign. The Bible is God's word. Just submit to that. You've been given your marching orders. So, stop looking into it and just start following orders. And, and notice John MacArthur still has books out, but the idea of apologetics was kind of anti submission. In fact, my youth pastor made a mistake in 1987 by giving me an apologetics book called Scaling the Secular City, J.P. Moreland.
Yep.
He didn't know about really apologetics. He just heard that a smart guy had written a book and he was trying to shut me up. So he got me the book. But then soon regretted it when he heard what J.P. Moreland had to say.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, he wouldn't budge.
Yeah.
And so I began, and not only that, after a few questions, at least in my church, questions were welcomed for a minute, but it was supposed to be, you ask, you get the answer, and then that's it. No more questions. But the idea of one answer leading to more questions would just kind of make them upset. But, not that anybody was mad at me, but I could just feel the tension that it just wasn't a good way to go about it. So at some point I began to think that, at least the Christians in my community that I trusted, they weren't the people that I could talk to about Christianity, because I could feel that tension. So it just left me to talk to, other people in the world.
Right.
And that led to me just thinking that Christians kind of come up with their own answers, not deceitfully, but you find something that works for you and you stick with it. Then I began to think, well, if the answers aren't the same and you don't change your mind, what if the faith is also like that?
Yeah.
And again, not thinking that people sitting around at a table saying, okay, we're going to make up a name of a God, or let's go with Jesus. Like, I don't think that's what happened. But I think that ultimately I began to think that religions are of human origin. I still think that. And it was the non-matching of the answers that got me to be that way. And I just want to caveat that by saying that now, so I guess I was in my low 20s when I finally let go of it. And now I'm 52. So it's been about 30 years. So while I still think that, I also think that atheists can do that too. It's not something, I no longer accuse religious people of doing this. I think that humans do it, so that everybody has a worldview. Everybody has some answers that they're comfortable with that they can't demonstrate to everybody else.
Right.
And so I think religious and atheists are like agnostics and people who've never heard of religion. I think everybody does this. So it's no longer something that I think that I'm above just because I'm not a Christian.
Right. Man, oh man. And you and I have had just messaging back and forth of certain situations where you've brought up certain points that are important, that point out certain things that Christians may do in circumstances that really, and I think you'd agree with me on this, that atheists tend to do too, where it's just like sometimes certain Christians and atheists just hit a brick wall. There's no reasoning. There's no honestly budging from their position. It almost becomes, correct me if I'm wrong, but almost becomes on both sides a point of arrogance.
Yep.
That no matter what you tell me, it will never convince me otherwise.
Right.
But yeah, exactly. And that turns into, even in my position, the same thing, where apologetics, no one knew what apologetics was. I was introduced to apologetics through my wife. I would always talk about certain things, deep topics, and she's like, you should check apologetics out. I was like, okay. So I checked it out and I fell in love with it. But it not only, you have one or the other. It's interesting, one or the other happen. You have one where it could lead away, one it could lead toward. And so for me, on a personal level, it led me toward God more, but it also helped me understand a concept of what other people are thinking. And that was, I don't want to say that was not there for me growing up. I grew up in a wonderful Christian home. I was blessed with wonderful parents, and they did a fantastic job. And I'm so honored by them. And so when it came down to it, when I started going into apologetics, it was a whole branch of newness, of talking about certain subjects that no one had ever heard, but it's scary to people. I should say it's scary to Christians. And sometimes it's enlightening to atheists when you bring up certain topics that when an atheist hears you talk about a certain point, they're like, oh, wow, so you think that way too. Yeah.
Right.
And then you come to those agreements. Like you and I have had several points where you and I numerous times on Facebook are like, yes, yes, I'm right there with you on this one, brother. Right. So I think that's so important to realize though, too. And something I always, and this about me, because you and I have had conversations about this on Facebook, but it breaks my heart the times that pastors and youth pastors especially are not prepared to help counsel and reassure or guide their kids or their congregation in these tough
Right.
questions.
Yes, and I do want to say one thing in quick defense of my youth pastor. I'm still friends with my youth group.
Oh,
And
good.
so we were friends in our preteens and early teens and through our teens and early 20s, and probably because of social media, but we're all still hanging out.
That's good.
And only two of us left. So the rest
Okay.
of us, we're still Christian. So
Okay.
maybe, there might be something statistically to approaching it the same way you were raised. So he was raised, and he and I have had these conversations. He was raised to, not ask too many questions and to accept.
Mhm.
And he taught that. And statistically speaking, his flock is still, in there. It's just
Right.
two of us that left. So
Right.
there's something to be said about tradition, and I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's comfortable. I think people hate change. And I
Mhm.
think sometimes, and this is just me assuming, not statistically, I think sometimes people assume in this way, but I think tradition makes people feel comfortable. And I don't agree with that personally, because I'm not a traditional person. I've
Right,
always been that person to say, if truth goes against your tradition, get rid of your tradition,
right,
in that way. And I try to be gentle in that way too, because some people are so grounded, their feet are so stuck in the cement, if you say, of tradition, that there's no pulling them out, no matter what you do,
yes,
you know, which is sad, rather than being open to say, hey, I could possibly be wrong here. Have I really looked into the evidence of this stuff? It's important. Have I really looked? Have I really searched? And I'm the same way as you, brother, where it's that point where you have two different positions come up. You have one where you're asking a lot of questions, and that's what I always try to do with our classes at church. Is they know I love questions. I'm like, if I don't know, I'll find it, no matter what. And we had a situation one time where we had all college kids, and I told my college kids, I said, if any of you guys came up to me and said, Jared, I'm not sure if I believe in God anymore, the number one thing I'm going to say is awesome. That's awesome that you're
Hmm.
thinking on your own. You're not going by just what I say. Not that you don't trust me, you trust me for sure, but
Right,
you're thinking on your own, and you can't always go by what I say. You have to make the decision on your own, which is exactly what God wants you to do. He wants you to come to him on your own, not because someone is showing you all these things. They may help in certain ways. I always say it's kind of like someone introducing you to your wife or your
mhm,
spouse, but that doesn't mean you marry that person. It just shows you an introduction.
right,
Um, and those can be different ways, but it's that point to say, but I always tell my students, but I've taught you how to look for truth. And I've taught you to say, okay, if my feelings are saying this and the truth is this, I need to ignore my feelings and go toward truth, regardless of how I feel about it. So I'm always trying to be in that gentleness and compassionate way of when people ask questions or when people are concerned. I'm not sure about this. I'm doubting this. Okay, well, let's look at it together. Have you checked out this? Let's look at this. Let's bring up some questions. Write all your questions down. Let's go through them together. And I try to
okay,
be open. Of course, we all fail.
right.
I could have always been a better, even to this day, I can always be a better pastor.
Well,
But
it
I
sounds
think,
like you're already more prepared than I think Tim Stratton, and he told you his original story.
yep.
Sounds like you're already a step above that.
So and that's where I've watched these guys, and they've been my unofficial mentors. I've watched them, and that has really helped me get on a level where sometimes Christians are not comfortable in getting.
Right,
I'm very comfortable in an atheistic environment with all my atheist friends. I'm very comfortable in that.
right. Good.
One, I just love questions. I'm like, hey, you guys can ask me anything you'd like. But I'm always that person to say, hey, we can be friends too. Don't worry about that. You know what I mean?
That's so
So
cool. I just now put that together that, for people who don't know Tim Stratton, he had as a religious leader of his flock, so to speak, he did have a bad experience, which set him back a little bit until he steeped himself in apologetics. But it's good to hear that hiccup for him helped you. So you're probably a stronger leader now, learning about that from him.
yeah, I hear all these stories of these different apologists, especially like Sean McDowell is one of my favorite guys. And he told me, not me personally, but I've heard stories about how he's learned in his ministry and learned as a teacher. And I've really adopted that. And I try to be as teachable as I can to say, okay, self-examination, am I doing this? What am I doing wrong? What do I need to change to help reach this person or to love this person more, whatever it may be? And even connecting with people who don't agree. How can I reach their level of meeting them where they're at, where they don't feel threatened either? Because that's one big thing about me is I'm not a person I'm gonna wait for you to bring it up with me, whatever question you have. As far as like if you and I hung out together,
Mhm.
unless you wanted to talk about faith or religion or atheism, I probably am not gonna bring it up. I'm probably gonna say, hey dude, you want to go see a movie tonight? Yeah, let's go out to dinner too. Let's go grab some food. Unless you brought it up, I'm not bringing it up. That's just not, I've never done that. That's just not in me. I've always allowed the other person to open that door for me to say, well, we can talk about whatever you'd like. It's up to you. I'm going to let you hold in the steering wheel at that point. But the next question we want to look at is what made you choose to start the Faithiest Atheist? Because that was intriguing to me. And I loved your picture too, because it was, a Star Wars type of picture. So that attracted me to your page also. So what made you want to start the Faithiest Atheist?
Yeah, I guess three things there. One is I wanted an atheist page that immediately let you know that I wasn't like a warrior atheist. So I was going to say something like the weak atheist or the insecure, or some sort of self condemnation
Right.
atheist. And then it occurred to me the one day that Faithiest rhymes, and I'm using the definition of faith that Frank Turek once used. I know he doesn't use it now, but back in his 2004 book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, he says faith covers a gap in knowledge. So the less evidence you have, the more faith is required. So using that definition, and I realize now he uses the completely different definition, but
Right.
using that, I'm saying, okay, there's things about atheism or the natural world that I can't explain, and I accept it even though I can't. So I use that. And so when Christians say, you have faith too, you have a religion as well, and I'm like, okay, well, that's my name. So I do that. And then I'll usually have imagery on my page. Like there's one with the Simpsons where the bartender throws somebody out, and I'll have like atheist under his name. And then the person that he throws out comes back around behind him and it says Faithiest to kind of show that you can't get rid of it. He's thrown out Faithiest, but Faithiest comes back around and is behind him. So I use that. And then the Star Wars thing you're talking about is like this big giant robot that has somebody on the neck, and it's Faithiest and he's the atheist. So I'll try to capture that tension in an image or two. Go ahead. Were you about to say something?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. And then the final thing is that, I work in the counterterrorism world, and I really focus on radicalization and the cognitive processes that people go through when they become so angry and bitter that they start to think of people as less than human. And I remember, and although there's classified stuff in my world, what I'm about to tell you isn't classified, but I saw, or I was reading two people who had decided they were going to be, terrorists. They decided they were going to kill people, but they were screaming at each other over a insignificant detail. They had split over this detail in their ideology, and so they were screaming at each other. And these guys had grown up together, and so even though they were bad guys and eventually had to meet justice, which they did, at the time I was like, they grew up together and they spent decades under pretty much identical conditions, but there's something about us that can make us split over something, and we get so caught up on something that they could hate each other. So I hate to say that I empathize with them, but what I did do is I realized that there's something about us that can really make you go dark, and that you get radicalized towards something that makes you hate other people.
Right.
And I was like, I want to fight that. So it's not that I'm fighting radicalization per se, because you can be radical about great things, but being radicalized towards hating and dehumanizing other people, I said, I want to fight that. So I really, I'd been an atheist forever, but I was like, I want to be the kind of atheist that's less vitriolic. So that was the beginning of my ministry, so to speak.
I love that. That's why I was describing your page to someone today at work, and they were just astounded that a Christian, which shows you that it's not a popular thing to do, which is weird to me, but I said, yeah, I said, I got to go, guys. I got my buddy coming on tonight. I said he runs his Faithiest Atheist ministry is how I defined it. And they're like, wait, he's an atheist? I was like, yeah. They're like, that's awesome, dude. You should, why more people should do. I was like, I agree. More people should do that. But yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's so much division that it just harms it so much on both sides, regardless of your position. It eventually, I like what you said, it almost dehumanizes them to say we're the superior, and it's not a position of truth either. It's just like, well, they're wrong and I can't have anything to do with them.
Right. And I think that's human nature. Like, I don't think, some of my atheist friends say that religion causes what you just said, but my pushback is that human nature can cause it. And if anything, if your religion has something to kind of push back against that human tendency, then all the better. So I don't think it's something that religion causes. I think it's something that can be exacerbated by some religious thoughts, but it can also be overcome, I think, with certain religious ideals.
Yeah, I think so. I think when you get down to the nitty-gritty parts of the situation, we can both agree that we're both searching for truth. Both of us are doing that. It's like one may even say, well, I feel personally that this is true, but that's because I've searched for it and I found this, and maybe the other person may not be there yet, or vice versa. And you even may see, even that, you still have to be so very careful, because that may come across a little bit of arrogance.
Right.
Not to say you're trying to be that way, but it is that type of situation where you're almost coming across saying, hey, I understand where you're at, and I've even been there before. And if you, rather than saying, here's where I am, say, I'm here to walk with you and you walk with me. Maybe I'm missing something, maybe you're missing something. We both can walk together and seek in this thing. And if we both come to different opinions at the end, or different positions, that's fine. We are both, that's the whole point. It's like, we're both free creatures doing our free will, both sides going to our own, what we decide to say is what I consider beyond a reasonable doubt, right or wrong. So I think that's awesome. And that's why when I first saw your page, it just attracted me to it. And then I seen your posts. I'm like, this is really fun. I was like, this guy is really fun, because even and you've seen a lot of my posts by now. I'm very sarcastic when it comes down to stuff. And I do it because I think sometimes I'll get your opinion on this. Things can be so serious on the Christian side, and I'll get your opinion on the atheist side. Things are so serious and I get it. I totally understand. There's a position of people who are like, yeah, but people are choosing heaven or hell. I totally understand it. Not discounting that at all. But the thing is, we're not getting anywhere if you won't even establish friendships.
That's it.
Do you know what I mean? So it's like we have Christians. I say, I'll put myself in the category too, to be fair. We have built a wall to say, well, we're too scared to operate outside of this. But we're missing our goal of winning people or showing people evidence for Jesus by saying, well, we don't want to go outside of our wall because we're uncomfortable there.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, what would the atheist side say about that position?
There are atheists that are just that fierce about it. And they say, we have a bunch of problems in the world that needs to be solved, and we can't get there until everybody stops being religious. So there's some who get up in the morning just as fiercely as atheists, and they're like really trying to save them. And I want to change the world, and this is so important, and people just need to see. And they get really angry and vicious and spend all day doing it. Sometimes I'll hear Christians say, why do you guys even care? Well, in some cases, the atheists are like, I'm trying to change the world by making everybody give up their religion so we can start talking logically about the world. Right. I understand how Christians push back against that, but that's what they honestly, genuinely believe. So that's why they're just as passionate. Yeah. And then some for the fierce atheists and the fierce Christians and fierce Muslims and Mormons. There's not too many fierce Mormons. We're actually in Mormon Central. We're not Salt Lake, but we're in Arizona, in the East Valley of Arizona, where this was all Mormon farmland for a long time. And they sold it to Mormon landscapers who built Mormon towns, and we have Mormon mayors and Mormon city councils. So,
So you're just surrounded by you're
right,
surrounded by the Mormons.
yeah, and they've made it their purpose to not be, their mindset to not be fierce, but there's some
Yeah.
fierce. But
Yeah.
I try to tell them all, there might be something that's, I try to give them like an actual metric, something that you can physically touch. So
Mhm.
like, I think religion is saying, there's going to be an eternal punishment. So that's
Right.
their metric, even though they can't show it. Whereas an atheist might say, I'm trying to show them a world without religion. Even though you might can imagine that, you can't show it.
Mhm.
So they're still kind of going for this metric that you can't demonstrate.
Mhm.
But take a metric that you can demonstrate. Like let's say, and this is a true story. We know someone who drinks those like 36-ounce sugar. I forget,
Monster.
Dutch brother, not
Oh
the
yeah.
but like a Dutch brother. Those things are one a week is awful.
Yeah.
But this person drinks like 3 a day, and they make it a point to do 3 a day. And it's caused tremendous health to the point where they tell us that what their doctor has said, and
Right.
the medicines that, and they won't stop. And they've isolated themselves to a degree because close people, friends and family they won't ever drop it, so no matter what's
Mhm.
happening, they'll say, you really need to look, and this person's not willing to do that. And it's an addiction, but they're just not willing to talk. They don't even want to talk about it.
No.
So then what do you do? And so in our family's case, we just, we're nice to them, and we're, hey, where are you going to go? And, and you could say, okay, well, you're cultivating and enabling this person is probably not going to live as long. But at the same time, they've made it known that they're in this situation, and they're not willing to talk about it. So
Right.
we drop it. And
Yeah.
it's unfortunate. And it is something that we can point to. We can point to the charts.
Yep.
We can point to some things going on about them physically, but they're not going to do that with us. So we hear that, and we continue to march as lovingly as we can. And
Right.
it's not that they have a point and we have a point. It's actually true what we have to say, and we can point to it, but
Yeah.
it's not going to be accepted. And that's just how it is.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I think that's a great example of showing, I think for both sides, Christians and atheists. I think when you have conversations with someone, you can tell who's open and who's not instantly as soon as you start talking about deep topics.
Yep.
And as soon as you talk about, like, for example, my really good friend who's an atheist, and he's just the funniest guy in the world too. And the first thing we talked about together was truth, where he thought truth was subjective. He thought truth was based on your opinion. Well, once we started going through the self-defeating statements together, he came to this, and he has a master's degree. He's brilliant.
Yeah.
But as soon as we started going through that together, he instantly came to almost like a fruition of, oh my gosh, okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
And it changed his mind. But he also changed my mind on something too, where he taught me, because I used to say how to prove Christianity true in a certain way.
Right.
And he taught me, he said, Jared, instead of saying it like this, because this sounds very arrogant, he says, I would go down the path of saying it like this. And he taught me a different way to say it. It didn't change, my position, but what he did was teach me how to be more sympathetic and compassionate and gentle with what I said.
Yeah, delivery is a huge part of it.
Exactly. So that's where we both changed our minds, but we both were open to the situation, because he asked me to, of course, one of the first questions he asked me, he's like, Jared, if Christianity were proven true or proven false, would you be a Christian still? I said, absolutely not. No way. I said, I will only go toward what is true beyond a reasonable doubt. And I asked him the same question. He's like, Jared, if we look and we talk together and we're able to come to this conclusion where I see evidence of a God's existence, and that is Jesus, hey, I will go right toward truth. But our conversations never broke past getting to Jesus, because we dug so deep into the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, and the moral argument. Right. Not to say we weren't progressing, but I loved it because he had so many questions about these things.
Right.
And I'm like, I'll stay here as long as you want. We don't have to get to any of this.
Yeah,
And
I actually see that as separate lines too. So
yeah,
like people ask me where I fall on the spectrum, and I say there's actually, for me, there's two spectrums. There's what you talked about, cosmological fine tuning, moral, sort of like a classical theism
yeah,
thing, as if there were, take Christianity off the table and just, is there a perfect being? So
right,
there's that spectrum that I fall on, and then there's a spectrum of whether Christianity is true, and
right.
I'm on completely different edges of not edges, but completely
Yeah.
different parts of those two spectrums.
And
And I don't even think they can merge, but that's just me.
yeah, we'll have to talk about that on another podcast. But I do that same thing though. I branch them off completely. And
Yeah.
now I've had a lot of Christians get mad at me because of that. Because one of the people and I want to be careful saying this, one of the people I really disagree with on his tactics and sometimes his theology is I'm gonna get a lot of people mad, but Ken Ham.
Right.
Ken Ham, I watched a video of him during a debate. I shouldn't say debate, a conversation with just Christians. It was
Right.
Christians, philosophers, and theologians, and he was so dogmatic.
I've
And
seen that.
so, have you seen that one? You know what I'm talking?
Yep. And,
That turned me off to him like that.
well, and maybe just a little bit more than 10 years ago, he was kind of the face of Christianity.
Mhm.
Remember when he debated Bill Nye?
Yeah.
People stopped what they were doing. They changed the channels. They found it
Mhm.
online, and like the world watched that.
Yeah.
But now it doesn't matter who he debates now. I think he's been overwhelmed by other probably better apologists, so that might upset him now that he's kind of fallen that
Yeah.
far in the
And
thinking.
and that's what I've said this before, where sometimes we make and you'll understand what I mean by this. We'll make the things that are non-salvation issues so dogmatic that they will trump the salvation.
Yep.
And that's what Ken Ham does with in my opinion, in my view,
Mhm.
the literal 6 days of Genesis
Right.
and how he takes Genesis, how he reads Genesis.
Yep.
And I'm just like, you're basing your whole, even Jesus's resurrection, you're basing all of it on these literal 6 days. And I'm like, okay, throw away the entire Bible and let's look at the non-biblical texts of Jesus's resurrection. The New Testament writers didn't have a New Testament, so there are certain things, and I don't want to get on a Ken Ham tangent, but
I know I see what you mean, is that you can be a Christian leader and still be off base.
yeah. And in that position, it shows you something important of how some people can be so dogmatic about silly things that
Yeah.
it's pointless when it comes down to it, and especially when you're calling people out that are Christians that disagree with you, even in the Christian sect of it. Um, I get in trouble many times where some Christians don't agree with me going to the starting like what you and I talked about, the cosmological, teleological, and the moral. I'll stick with that most of the time. Most people only have the opportunity to have a conversations about those three things. I hardly ever get to the New Testament. And if people ask about the New Testament, I'm always backing up to say, okay, wait, before we talk about that, do you think a God exists? Well, no. Okay. I'm not even going to talk about the book where you don't believe an author exists, because there's
Right.
going to be no point to that. Because
Right.
we can complain about stuff all day long in the Bible. That's fine, but it's pointless if we don't go through these steps first.
Right.
And I try to be fair that way too.
Yeah.
As much as I can. So, but
That's
yeah,
another thing that's changed. I know that, Christian scholars have been presenting those for arguments for centuries, but again, when I grew up, that didn't come up. Until I got that apologetics book from J.P. Moreland, I
yeah,
had never heard of such things. That it was always Bible, Bible. I get it, the Bible, but I think generationally, a lot of Christian towns had gotten to the point where it was just sort of an evangelical, just the Bible and submit,
mhm,
which probably worked, but it missed the ancient history of Christianity,
exactly.
doing what they're talking about now.
I did that one time when I introduced. Now, my dad is my boss at my church,
Okay.
and so he is the head pastor at our church. And bless his heart, he has to take all the complaining. So,
Right.
and so when he first allowed me to introduce people to apologetics, he trusted me, and he knew I knew what I was doing, and he knew I knew what I was talking about when I brought certain things up, even though it sounded scary to people that haven't heard it.
Right.
But the first thing I did was bring up the position of, I held up my Bible and I was like, hey, why is this true? Well, they said, because I have faith. I'm like, well, who cares? I was like, and I went down the Frank Turek, if I don't have faith in gravity, do I float away? You know, those situations. But then it got people thinking on a deeper level of, okay, what makes this true? Why do I believe what I believe? And I wasn't trying to get people to doubt. I was trying to get people to, I want you to think on your own and not just go by the circular reasoning. Well, it's true because it says it's true.
Right.
I want you to think on your own. So, but yeah, well, let's move on to the next question. I'm super jealous in a righteous way, as much as I can say it, when you attend all the apologetics conferences
Yes.
and you get to meet all my favorite guys. I'm like, oh, dude, I'm so envious of you right now.
Yeah.
What, why do you, I know some people are curious. I even had some of my friends who knew I was going to do this podcast. They're like, ask him why he attends all the apologetic conferences. So I probably have an idea of why, but I'll let you explain it. So why do you attend apologetic conferences?
Yeah, it's like I was saying before, when I decided I wanted to fight that, I've been an atheist forever, but when I decided I actually wanted to start a page, it was more the diplomacy. So I was like, I'm going to have a diplomatic page, which is why I had to pick an atheist name that wasn't foreboding. It wasn't like, oh, warrior atheist. So I had to pick something that was the opposite of that. And then I had to show that I'm willing to go engage directly. So, if someone says, hey, if you listen to Greg Kokel, you're going to change your mind. And I'll be like, oh, you mean this Greg Kokel? And, and the book that he signed for me, and then this other book that he signed for me.
Yeah.
So I can engage directly with the source, and I can hold my own. I've had conversations with Greg Kokel, that lasted a while. I was surrounded by Dan Wallace, Mike Lacona, Leighton Flowers, Eric Hernandez, all coming at me for hours, and I held my own.
That's awesome.
So to be able to, and then not only that, like we're finished with that, and then we're like, okay, burgers, pizza, and,
right.
And nobody feels like they've been unfairly maligned or treated badly. We'll just as easily talk about something else next. So I just wanted to be able to say that I actually did do that. And then also I do kind of have a passion for the moral argument, because a lot of non-believers become Christians because of the moral argument. But also also on morality, a lot of Christians walk away because of passages in the Bible that seem to be violations of the moral argument, or the idea of this universal morality that applies to everybody. There's some Christians that walk away that say, okay, well, I believe in that moral argument, but now I don't know why this passage says this.
Right.
And then there's different Christian scholars who deal with that in a different way. So I'm always fascinated with that, because there's another Christian scholar named David Baggett who says morality is everything. I agree with that. I say that we all have meaning systems, even atheists, and our meaning systems are, they have two platforms, and one platform is morality and the other one is epistemology. Those are our two platforms. And so at some point they become together. The morality and epistemology just becomes like one giant network for all of us, for atheists, Mormons, Muslims, Hindus, and it's this big thing where morality, everything is you're intellectually obligated to believe this, and you're morally obligated to do this. And so because of that, I'm really fascinated with how people study morality and what their takes are. So to have a moral conference where the greatest Christian scholars pretty much in the world had been hired or coaxed by David Baggett to write a book. In fact, in a couple of years, there's going to be a book from these scholars that I just listened to. They all came to Houston Christian University, and we got to listen to all of them and hang out with them. And I'm like, if I'm the moral guy, then I've got to be there. So I was.
Yeah. Yeah. And I told my wife, I said, I am just so jealous right now. I said, you were taking pictures with all these guys, getting all their books signed and everything. And it was just, but it's awesome. And, one of the things that I really compliment you on, because we're trying to do this more with our church, is this summer is because apologetics is more like the outreach. And so what I'm going to try to do is go to college campuses and just have, my sign out and, say a question on there, whatever it may be. Right. And just have people come by and say, hey, if you want to talk about it, cool. If you don't, cool. What are your thoughts on this? in going into that realm where people many times are too scared to go. And I think you and I both stand on the same point here, where it's like, it's not so much. I don't look at that as a fear to go. Do you ever look at that as a fear to go or scared to go to those situations?
No, I look forward to it. I'm eager. I'm eager, and I've been schooled before, but so I'm 52. I've been in the Marines. My dad wasn't. We get along great now, but he wasn't. He wasn't ready to be a dad.
Okay.
So I've had a lot of testing. Times that were challenging for me. So I can take a hit. So
Yeah.
there's times where I walk in eagerly and get smacked, and then I'm like, okay, part of that was my excitement. I don't
Right.
completely blame the other parties. So yeah, I'm eager, and at the same time, if I really get smacked around, I can admit it, and I don't
Right.
have to be defensive. I can say, I went in here knowing that it was going to be challenging, and these things happen.
And that's how I'm the same exact way there,
That's
where
awesome.
I'm more eager. I'm more like, I'm excited. Like, okay, throw questions at me, because I want to see if there's something I haven't heard.
Right.
And that's my whole thing. I'm like, yeah, I'm a Christian because I believe it's true beyond a reasonable doubt from the evidence that I've looked at, and experiencing Jesus and in my life. But I want to hear questions that I'm not even aware of. Throw me stuff out as much as you can, and I want people to feel comfortable doing that. I would never want someone, even an atheist, most of all, I would never want someone to feel like they can't come and ask me a question.
Right. That's exactly the kind of world I want, where we can talk about it and say your piece. And if you're not persuaded, you can still hang out.
Yeah. I love I love that what you said. It's like you guys just went and had pizza afterwards.
Right. By the way, the university you're going to do they have a Ratio Christi chapter there?
There's a couple of them. I think the one I'm going to, I don't believe they do. I'm gonna see if we can. That's where my thought was going to, is see if we can get one set up if they don't have one, because
I was going to say you can be the guy. It's
I know.
and I know several of them by now, and it'll change your life. It's already what you do, but once you're that guy, then the actual Ratio Christi organization will put you to work.
Yeah, and that's the part that I really would want to get involved in, is that whole set of, okay, I'm not a, and just like you, not that it's you and I both, not that it's an arrogant thing, but we're both like, we're not afraid to go into the other, go to the quote unquote other side. I don't want to mean it to sound demeaning, but it's like, go to the other side of what people believe and say, hey, ask away. Go ahead. I'm here to listen. I'm here to help in any way I can. And many times, maybe even on your side too, it feels like sometimes there's apologies to be made, where my heart breaks many times, where I've heard of some of my atheist friends and how they were treated in the church.
Right.
And that just breaks my heart. I'm kind of like, oh my gosh, if you lived closer, you could come to my church,
Right.
and enjoy it, and ask questions as much as you want. So I'm the same way with you, brother. I want us to be able to kind of have, not kind of, but have that open communication, but open friendship too, to say, hey, I trust you as my friend, and you're not trying to hurt my feelings. You're not trying to demean me. You're genuinely searching, and you're asking questions about what my worldview is, and vice versa,
Right.
back to your worldview.
I
So
wanted to point out real quick before you go to the next question that
yeah.
Something I do to tell Christians that sometimes put them at ease. So, some Christians also express guilt or just they're upset to hear about past problems that other Christians have started. But one thing I point out is that you guys are the dominant religion. So if there was another dominant religion, then statistically speaking, that religion is going to have a whole bunch of problems, just because we're people.
Right.
So whatever the dominant religion is, that's also going to be the one where there's most problems, just
Yep.
statistically speaking. So I tell people, don't blame Christianity. Just realize that you guys are kicking butt right now. And so obviously you're going to have problem children just because of the nature of numbers.
Yeah, there's so much, and I'm always compassionate with people too, because I've been in that position where I've, like I said, I've learned, and continue to learn, of the rights and the wrongs of how to talk about things. And even me, I look back at some of my messages that I've done, and I'm like, man, I could have said that better. Man, I could have done that better. And it's a learning curve, and it's trying to always get better to reach the person in front of you Not to, and I always make this point, I'm not here to convert you. That's the point. I'm not here to convert you whatsoever. I'm here to establish a friendship.
Right.
That's it. I'm here to establish a friendship and talk about some cool topics, and what we call or define as eternal topics. And so that's the goal. And if people had that more, where they could say, "Hey, I'm here not to convert you," but I like Greg Kokel's, tactic where he says, "Put a stone in someone's shoe." I think that's so well said.
I think we should all do that. I think the stones in the shoes is sometimes the best you can do.
Yep, I agree. Okay, now here's a fun one. I got a couple of fun ones, and then we just got about 15 minutes, and we'll be done.
Okay.
So here's a fun one. We'll get into a fun topic. What do you think is the best argument for atheism?
Okay, so I know you've heard like Ricky Gervais and other atheists say, "I believe in one less God than you."
Yeah.
And so I don't like, in fact, I was going to do a video on this and I haven't published it yet. In fact, I might reshoot it because I want to tread carefully on this one.
Mhm.
The way that they say that is condescending.
Mhm.
And so I don't like that. And plus, philosophically and logically, just because the other religions aren't true, and we agree that doesn't make your religion true.
Right.
So that doesn't work. But I will say the thing that keeps me an atheist isn't problems with Christianity. It's just that us as a species, we seem to be so gifted at clinging to different ideals. Usually it's moral and epistemic ideals. Sometimes we're willing to lay down our lives for them. And again, you don't have to be religious to do that. If you really think it's important, you can really go all in to the point where you're, making your own family angry at you.
Mhm.
Because we're like that sometimes, it makes me wonder if anybody's keeping score. It makes me think that at best, if there is some higher being that, aliens are in some university, cosmic university, watching us and, taking notes and saying, okay, let's poke them here and see what happens or write it down. So I don't get this feeling that there's something watching and saying, okay, the right thing,
Mhm.
you're driving by a casino. I want to make sure you go home, that you don't go to the casino. It makes me think that there's not somebody like that.
Right.
So, and again, that doesn't disprove any theism. You could still say a deity created us and walked away,
Mhm.
or a deity created us just to mess with us. And he's like, I just want to, I'll go tell this guy one thing and go tell this lady something else and just watch him fight.
Mhm.
So that doesn't disprove anything, but it makes me think that probably there's nothing keeping score. Nothing.
Okay. Awesome. That's very interesting. I love that. Yeah, I lean toward for the best argument for atheism. I think in situations on the surface level, I think it's the moral position. I think it's the problem of evil. I think that's probably because it's the most emotional. I
Yeah.
think I think it's the most emotional, and many times you can have conversations with people, especially with me being a pastor. There are times where you have a philosophical conversation, and there are times where you have an emotional conversation.
Right.
Not to say they contradict each other, but there's a way of explaining it.
Right.
I had a lady one time, unfortunately her little one had passed away, and she had prepared for almost a year and a half of losing their little one, because the little one had passed away from cancer.
Right.
And she had prepared almost a year and a half. So she was at a point where when she asked me, "Jared, why is God," and she was a Christian, but she was like, "Why is God allowing my little one to die?" I could speak philosophically with her
Right.
because she was at that point where she's accepted what's occurring. So she's already grieved to that point, and now she was seeking the philosophical answer or the truth behind it.
Right.
So we were able to have a great discussion. But I've done funerals before where I always tell Christians, never come up and say never. I want a bumper sticker that says this. Never say everything happens for a reason.
Right.
Never. The best thing you can do for someone at a funeral is to say nothing and just hug them and love them.
Absolutely agree. I absolutely agree with that. And it could be that everything, it does happen for a reason, but once again, delivery, because you could really turn somebody off forever by saying that.
Yep.
Even if it's true.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's kind of like I gave the example one time where it's like if someone comes up, God forbid, if I lost my wife and someone came up to me and said, even though I'm a Christian, and they said, Jared, everything happens for a reason. I'm not going to lie. If I lost my wife and some Christian said that to me, I'd probably deck them in the face. And say everything happens for a reason, doesn't it? That happened for a reason, didn't it? You know what I mean? I'd hope I wouldn't do that, but it's just like you look at those situations and people are broken and hurting. The last thing they want is reason.
Right.
They want comfort and they're emotional. So I think those are two different ways to look at those situations, but you have to listen to the person asking. That's why anybody who asks me, hey, Pastor Jared, why doesn't your God get rid of evil? If I'm talking to that person in front of them, I try my very best to remember this before quickly answering. I try my very best to say, well, that's an interesting question. Out of all the questions about God, how come you picked that one? Because there's so many other questions we could ask. Why'd you pick that one? Because it seems, and so I've learned that over time, it seems like there's something behind that question that is dawning on them, that something either bad happened to them or to someone else. They lost someone, or something tragic is going on, or they've been dealt a bad hand in their language. I mean, so I think it's always good to dive in more, but I tend to fall in that best argument for atheism is on the surface level. I think it's the moral argument. I think it's the volitional or the emotional position of I'm hurting, and why am I hurting? Explain that to me. So yeah, I loved your answer too. That was fantastic. All right, so now we got a couple more and then we'll be done.
Okay.
What in your opinion is the best argument for theism? Or it's up to you if you want to go down this road, but you and I both do the same thing where we differentiate talking about theism and Christianity. You have to go to here first to get to here.
Right.
But what do you think in your opinion, best argument for theism and Christianity would be?
Okay. And remember, I said before that I see the theism scale down here and the Christianity, and I don't think they can merge. I don't think it's impossible for them to ever merge. But I'm going to do the theism first, the foundational. I always call that foundational spectrum first.
Okay.
All of it works together for me. The fact that there's anything at all, so the cosmological, the fact that, whether you want to go this way scientifically about, something had to give rise to all of us and to everything that we see, or if you want to say necessary and contingent, however you want to do that, just the fact that there's the stuff, and the fact that so much of it works in exactly the right order. So, fine tuning, all of that, makes me think, maybe there is, maybe, it's not just an accident. Maybe there is something. So I can see why a lot of people would take that and say, okay, it seems like there's something going on more than everything being accidental. In fact, my youngest daughter, who's a believer, she's a teenager now, but she was 4 years old when her sister, who's not a believer, was talking about how there's she was talking badly about religious people, and the younger girl at 4 years old, she was like, but look at all this stuff, and I was driving the car, and there's my 4-year-old looking outside the car going, look at all this stuff. And I said, that is a good argument. So then that's sort of a combination of cosmological and fine tuning. So I can see that. I will say, I don't think I could ever believe in Christianity unless, Jesus or some authority were to say, this passage in the Bible doesn't belong here. It shouldn't have been put here. And closest thing I can come to right now is Greg Boyd, who does something like that. If you've ever heard of Greg Boyd, he's a Christian scholar. He has a book called Crucifixion of a Warrior Guide. And he'll say there's just some passages that were written by people who are deep in vitriol, and that made the cut when it shouldn't have. And you'd have to take that out to get to something like classical theism, to where the Bible, I was telling Horatio Christie, I was talking to the Horatio Christie director at ASU just earlier today, and I said, the PowerPoints for the moral argument are more persuasive than the Bible when taken as a whole. So when I read or I listen to a Christian scholar giving the moral argument, and I read all of his slides, I'm like, that's better to me than the Bible as a whole. That's not to say that when you look at all the cool stuff in the Bible, then that doesn't work because there's a lot of cool stuff in the Bible. But if you could keep all the cool stuff and then take away the stuff that seems to violate the moral argument, then I think you guys would have a slam dunk, especially if there was a 2,000-year-old manuscript that says stuff like, you will never slaughter women and children. This is a moral law written into your hearts and you know it, you will never do it. And if all the verses said that, then I would be like, how in the world did, and actually that stuff actually was before the New Testament. That would have been, hundreds, thousands of years before that. But I'd still be like, wow, the fact that people back then were thinking this is amazing. And I realize there's some parts in there that do, even in the Old Testament about, love your neighbor as yourself. So I'm picking and choosing here when I say this.
No, you're good.
But I would say I can't accept the Bible as written by the same guy that Christian scholars say is written in our hearts. I can't say the same guy wrote both of those things.
Okay.
Unless someone says that, and at this point, I think I have to be Jesus. Right. They had their free will. I didn't want them. We inspired them to not do it, and they did it. Then I would accept Christianity. Otherwise, Christianity looks to me like the dominant worldview, and it's got enough good stuff, and it had enough good advocates, so that our culture is very dominant Christian. The language, our mindset, the idea of the ground up instead of like a top elites and just telling people the fact that most of us think in terms of starting from the ground and working up, that's a Christian concept. There's just so many, our languages, our mindset is just so much Christianity in that. But my take there is that it's just the dominant, there had to be one dominant worldview, and Christianity is that dominant worldview. So I give it credit, but I still think it's of human origin. And I don't think I can be convinced it's true unless those parts were, not just taken out because we don't like them, but because an authority said they never should have been in there. And it's the fault of humanity that they made their way in there.
Okay, man, you're giving me so many cool ideas for future videos with you and I. It's just so much stuff. I love it. Awesome. So, okay, one more question and we'll be done for today. Okay. So what are you specific, and I'm going to word it just like this too, since you separate Christianity completely from theism. What are you doing right now, specifically regarding atheism or theism? Are you at a point where you're searching, or do you feel confident that atheism is true?
Yeah, my take is that I don't foresee me joining any religion. And if I were to come to think, do you know Tyler Vela? You ever heard of him? He's another apologist who was a Calvinist. Okay. And then he decided to back away from Christianity, and he just became a classical theist, for pretty much the same reasons as I just said, is that the ideas behind classical theism made more sense to him and were more consistent and coherent, and that there were parts of Christianity that he thought violated that. So he dropped from Christianity to classical theism. And I could, possibly at some point, see that might do that. So I don't know that I can see me joining a particular religion, because I do think they're of human origin, but I do read a lot, and I like to read. In fact, from that conference that I just went to, I came back with about 7 to 8 books, some of which I'd read, like On Guard. I met William Lane Craig and had him sign it, but I've read that, but the fact that he signed it makes me, I'm going to read it again. Yeah. I'm just going to read through them again, and I'll keep reading it. And, I do the same because I actually engage with Mormons more than Christians, because they're here and knocking on the door. And yeah. So, I'm jealous about that. Like, we had Jehovah's Witnesses for a while knocking on their door, and they just stopped knocking. And I'm tempted to just, because you can go online and request someone to come to your house. Yep. So I'm tempted to go do that. Not of course, not to bring them in and humiliate them. That's no way. But to bring them in, here's some coffee. Yes. Do you guys want something to eat? And say, okay, I'd like to just sit and listen to you guys. Let's just talk together. Let's see what we have here. Yeah, so that's really my thing. It's like I was saying before at the beginning, that my thing is really about diplomacy rather than making anybody an atheist. Right. So that's really what I do. I try to read to understand. I do have a lot of biases, in my counterterrorism world. I have a lot of biases that might even be holding me here and keeping me closed-minded about this.
Mhm.
So, I'm open to that. If someone wakes me up and I realize, oh my gosh, I've been blinding myself. Like I said before, I can take a hit if it ever
Right.
occurs to me like that. So that's really my thing. More than thinking, is a particular religion true? I'm sort of convinced that they're of human origin. And again, the genetic fallacy, maybe humans made up the correct religion. So it could be that one of them still true. But more than me trying to explore if one is true, I'm kind of have my mind made up that they're not. But at the same time, I still want to understand, and I still want this to be the kind of world where we treat each other as best as we can. Given the fact that we're going to probably have different worldviews to our graves.
Right. That's awesome, brother. I'm going to ask you one more question. This is off topic, but I just want your opinion.
Okay.
Because I have an idea for a podcast later with you and I.
Okay.
But what is your position on progressive Christianity? I know we've discussed this just a little bit here and there, but I just really would love your. I know I didn't put this in the email, but it's something off the cuff.
Okay, this probably will be one of those things where we'd have to spend a whole hour to talk about it.
Yeah.
The short version is I can easily sympathize with some of the Christians who say that evangelicals have messed up and have gone off the rails on some issues. And I can easily sympathize with the idea that, because it's true, that some cultures have oppressed other cultures. And so like the original version of woke, which is to be aware of that and to try and stop it, I'm all for it. But within progressive Christianity, and they're usually over in the liberal side, there's now become this authoritarian realm within it. And they're not as centralized as over on the right. I think the right has an authoritarian realm too, but they're fairly centralized on a few people. Whereas over on the left, it's kind of all over the place, and people who are in charge of the authoritarian over on the left, this is my left, I think will be everybody else's right, but that authoritarian today might get canceled next week, and it'll be a new authoritarian. So somebody over here is kind of controlling it fiercely. They might get canceled and kicked off, and then so the left authoritarian is kind of all over the place. And the rules of authoritarianism is that you can't question whoever that authority is, no matter what they say. So like today could be rule A, and tomorrow could be negative A. And everybody who supported A on the day before are suddenly in trouble because they were backing up. I found a tweet where you backed up A. Yeah, but we were all backing up A. You required me to back up A, right? Stop it, Nazi. So there's an element there that is definitely falling into ruin based on their own creation. So those are the ones who are making the news, and it's easier for me to critique them.
Yeah.
But when I meet a Christian who's like, okay, I'm progressive, and that I've deconstructed from some of the rules that I think are ancient, and I still love Jesus. Or if I meet somebody who says, hey, I'm fighting for people who've been oppressed and who really are trying to, then I'm all for it. So I can't say that I'm like a Ben Shapiro warrior. But at the same time, I'm also not a Rachel Maddow warrior either.
Right. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Cause it gets muddy in a position where you almost have to ask the person, and like I said, we'll do a whole nother podcast about this, but it's almost like that's been coming up now to me even more than atheism is progressive Christianity. And it's something I've been diving into more with Alicia Childers, and reading her book. And then she just came out with another one. I haven't got a chance to read it yet, but that introduced me to it so much more.
There's probably a lot we could talk about that, where I would disagree with a lot of people on the right. And then obviously I've already said where I disagree with people on the left. So that would be a nice long conversation.
Yeah. I think that we'll have to plan that for another time. I know some people around here are like, how come you didn't talk about this? And guys, this whole video today was there you go. I lost on this one. Sorry, guys. No, but this whole video today was honestly just a fun introductory video, but just getting to know, for you guys to get to know my friend more, as I have got to know him more. And so I was just so excited, brother, to have you on today, and so excited. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us, and we're going to plan more. And it's just going to be so much fun as we dive into some more topics. And that's why I want people to see the biggest thing. What I want them to take away today is this, is that you and I are still friends, regardless of what we agree or disagree on.
I think that's the key.
That's the most important thing, is we're still buddies. We joke around. I like your Facebook posts, you like my Facebook posts, and it's just like we have a fun banter back and forth with each other because we care about each other, but we stay friends regardless if we agree or disagree. And I think that's the most important thing today I want people to take away from. But did you want do you want to do a closing statement or anything, brother? Or?
Just anybody who's listening, if you come to my page and ask me a question, you can't insult me. I'll take the hit. And if we become friends, then all the better.
Awesome. I love it, brother. Well, thank you so much, buddy. So much for being on the podcast. Make sure to hang on there, because as soon as I end this, we'll talk a little bit more.
Okay. Awesome.
So, but awesome, guys. Well, thank you guys so much for listening to us today. Make sure to tune in to Shield Apologetics, sharing his identity, evidentially leading doubters, as we'll do more videos with my buddy here, the Faithiest Atheist. And then also we'll put some more videos up with more content of tough questions that come up in our daily walk. So, all right, guys, we'll hope you guys have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye, guys.